Thank you, and thanks to John, actually, for his introduction. I've been charged with putting together the Institute for Mental Health and Wellbeing for the university, and John will be on that committee. So the work that Breakthrough does and that the Flinders Foundation does is going to be a very important part of what we do moving forward. So what I thought I'd do today is give you a kind of a sense of some of the research that I've been doing. It's only a small little drop of water in the ocean of research that's being done here, not only at Flinders, but I mean South Australia wide. And I thought I'd focus on obsessive compulsive and spectrum disorders. And I'll give you a bit of a sense of some of the work that we've done to try and understand them, and some of the work that we've done to develop treatments, particularly treatments that will now be able to be embedded within a step care approach. So what we'll talk about today are, what are the obsessive compulsive spectrum disorders? It's not just those quirky little people that wash their hands a lot, or the Jack Nicholsons of the world who seem to star in a movie about OCD every 10 years. And why it's actually important to understand these disorders, why they're so important to understanding the disability and the effect that it has on people. And then we'll talk about new directions in managing and treating them. So I've worked with a whole range of people, and in fact a lot of my research has been instigated by philanthropy, particularly Affirm, and particularly the Telematics Trust actually started some of the research that we've been doing. But of course NH&MRC have been very good to us, as well as the Department of Health. So obsessive compulsive spectrum disorders and related disorders. Well, there was a restructure of the kind of Bible of psychiatric disorders, the DSM, in 2013. And OCD, which had been previously obsessive compulsive disorder, that had previously been considered to be an anxiety disorder, the anxiety disorders were kind of restructured, and there was a part of them called the obsessive compulsive and related disorders, which include body dysmorphic disorder, people who are obsessed about certain parts of their body and have misappraisals and misinterpretations of how they look. It's not quite eating disorders, but they certainly share many features. Hoarding disorder, and for the first time, hoarding disorder was identified as an actual psychiatric disorder. Very important, because these people have really fallen through the gaps. Mental health has never come to the help of people with hoarding disorder. It was considered to be a sort of a subtype of OCD, but in fact never mentioned in DSM, certainly not as part of OCD, mentioned as a sort of a byline of obsessive compulsive personality disorder, and yet the 25% of deaths in fires in family homes happen in the homes of people with a hoarding problem. So not only related to morbidity, but actually to mortality. And then there's a few others as well. Their common features, of course, is that they are associated with intrusive repetitive thoughts, urges or images. They're unwanted. They cause distress, they cause discomfort, and they cause interference. So people can't stop thinking about them. They're repetitive. And they're very time intensive. It can take somebody with OCD 2 or 3 or 5 hours to get ready to leave the house. It can take them 2 or 3 or 5 hours to leave the car behind because of the checking or the washing or the other compulsions. And I'll describe these soon. It's associated with a lot of shame and embarrassment. People with OCD have a lot of blasphemous, a lot of sexual, a lot of religious thoughts that they don't want to have, and it fills them with enormous amounts of shame and embarrassment. So much so that they actually don't seek out help. So they're very poor help seekers, which means that they don't get treatment in time, which means that and even if they do seek out treatment, well, we have problems in our health system that I'll talk about soon. There's a lot of avoidance and social isolation as a result of that, and this is why OCD in particular is associated with high degrees of disability, and I'll show you some of that data soon. Now we've got a few other things happening in track at the moment. So compulsive buying, shopping disorder has now been acknowledged by ICD-11 as a disorder. So again, these are not the quirky people who go and impulse shop. These are people who have very, very, very severe problems. And again, this causes difficulties at home, difficulties at work, and so on and so forth. So I won't talk a little about buying disorder, but invite me back next year and I will. Okay, so what is OCD? OCD is characterised by either obsessions or compulsions, although most people present with both. Obsessions are defined as recurrent, persistent thoughts. Might be the thought of the house burning, of the house, that the house might burn down, or that some harm might come to somebody. They might be urges, so people actually feel the urge to check or to jump off an edge of a train station, or the urge to stab someone, or the urge to kick a baby. They don't want to have these, but they feel the urge that they might do it. Or they might have images of doing these things. And as you can imagine, these things are very distressing. They are intrusive, they are unwanted, and people try to either ignore or suppress or undo or neutralise the danger or the threat that they feel might be associated with the thought or the urge. So they try and take some kind of action, whether it's a mental action or whether it's a physical action, a physical act of checking, or a mental act of going through the day's events and thinking, did I do this or did I do that? So these responses are called compulsions. And compulsions are repetitive behaviours, hand washing, ordering or checking, or mental acts, so counting, repeating words silently, praying. And the person feels driven to actually perform these, and often according to particular rules. So people who have showering rituals will have to go through a particular sequence to shower properly, to shower perfectly. And quite often the pressure is so intense that they forget which part of the sequence they're up to. So they have to start all over again. And we all have this idea. We all know what it's like. The harder we try sometimes, the worse our performance is. And we know that in anxious students. So students sit down to have an exam, you need a little bit of anxiety, because if you have no anxiety, you don't study, you don't focus. But actually, after a certain point, the anxiety becomes, kind of undermines your performance. And this is what happens in OCD too. So the more people try and perform things in a particular sequence, the more likely they are to forget, and the more likely they are to have to go back again. Now, these compulsions are aimed at preventing or reducing the distress and preventing the dreaded event. So if I have a bad thought that my parents might die, I have to do something to make sure that my parents don't die. Young kids have these thoughts too, and it's just absolutely awful for them. And clearly these compulsions are often not particularly connected realistically to the desired outcome, and they're clearly excessive anyway. Up to 3% of the population will have OCD at some point in their lives. That's 750,000 Australians. And there is consistency about this across many countries. It is a leading cause of disability. It was once ranked as the 10th leading cause of disability in the world in terms of lost income and decreased quality of life, while schizophrenia was rated 9th. So it is a highly disabling disorder. But of course, there is a spectrum here. The World Health Organization now lists anxiety disorders in which they include OCD, haven't caught up with DSM, as the 6th largest contributor to non-fatal health loss globally. So, and the other thing is that up to 10% of patients who have OCD will attempt suicide at some point in their life. It's poorly understood and diagnosed. We all have the notion of the quirky person, as I mentioned before, but OCD, and because there's a little bit of it in all of us, particularly those in the medical and health professions, you have to have a little bit of OCD. But actually, people with OCD quite often say that even that statement kind of offends me, because having a little bit of OCD is a little bit like the risk that you have to take to cross a road. Whereas across the street, where someone with OCD doesn't have to cross the street, they have to walk across a tightrope 100 stories above without a net. And every moment of their day can be like that. Well, that's not just a little bit OCD, right? That's a whole lot of walking across the road or walking across to get to the other side, but that's on steroids, and the distress that they feel far, far, far exceeds the anxiety we might feel in just walking across the road. It's missed because there's a broad range of symptoms that are seen in many other disorders as well. 50 to 60% of people with OCD will also have major depression. 30% will have GAD. 30% will have social anxiety disorder. So it's missed. And although effective treatments do exist, only about a third will actually receive treatment. And the similar poor outlook is we see this actually across all the other obsessive compulsive unrelated disorders. So, and BDD, in particular body dysmorphic disorder, has very high suicide rates. Now, the causes of, and I'm going to focus on OCD, but I might mention hoarding on the odd occasion. So the causes are complicated, right? There are numerous simple models and they're not very well integrated. And that is problematic. Now, there are biological and brain theories and models. There are theories about genes, theories about brain receptors and structures and functions. And there are other biological factors, particularly PANDAS, which is a form of OCD in children caused by a streptococcal infection. And then there are psychological models as well. Sociocultural factors. We know that whilst OCD is seen across all cultures, actually it differs in how it presents in certain cultures. So people from the Middle East, irrespective of whether they're from a Jewish background or whether they're from an Islamic background, tend to present more with purification concerns and washing rituals. There are theories about past experiences. So there's learning theories, attachment theories. In the hoarding research that we've done, we found that hoarders, or people with hoarding problems specifically, unlike those with OCD, unlike those with anxiety disorders, unlike healthy controls, have recollections of lower warmth in their family of origin. So there's a kind of a theory about the stuff that they amass as kind of compensating for the lack of warmth that they experience in their families. There are theories about memory and other mental capacities or confidence in memory. Some of these theories are related to the neurocognitive theories that I mentioned before. And there are theories about normal psychological processes. If you absolutely positively try and forget something and tell yourself, I will not think about a pink elephant in a tutu, I will not think about a pink elephant in a tutu, I will not think about a pink elephant in a tutu, guess what you've done? You've only just thought about a pink elephant in a tutu. So all these thought suppression strategies that people with OCD use actually lead to a rebound effect. And so they're more likely to think about the thing that they've tried to stop themselves from thinking about. So we've done a fair bit of research on the brain and OCD through the brain sciences facility that we developed at Swinburne when I was there. And the research can be divided into the hardware versus the software. And look, yes, we find a lot of problems in a lot of functional differences between people with OCD and schizophrenia, people with OCD and healthy controls, but we find very few structural differences. There are some, and certainly between OCD and schizophrenia, but very few between OCD and healthy controls. Actually, a lot of differences though between schizophrenia and healthy controls. And part of the problem with the brain models is it the chicken or is it the egg? What came first? Is it as a result of having these symptoms, or is it some other reason? Are there other considerations? Now, what's interesting is that the brain models have really not been all that useful up until now. Whilst the serotonergic medications certainly are very effective in OCD, the serotonin hypothesis has been kind of disproved. But a lot of these models are now being used in assessment and in treatment to try and understand treatment processes. And we ourselves have done that, but these are only emerging very slowly. So one of our studies, for instance, found, we were looking for neurocognitive predictors of treatment outcome. And we did find a neurocognitive task that did predict treatment outcome quite well. Others have looked at the neurocognitive components, aspects of it from the perspective of assessment. And they found weak correlations between observed and predicted severity using the Y box. And you can see that there are various parts of the brain that are much more related to the diagnosis of OCD. So we'll see this stuff coming on board. There's a lot of machine learning research that's being done, and I think in 10 years' time we'll be in a far better place. But actually, the most popular or the most consistently useful model of OCD is the psychological model or the cognitive behavioural model. So this is sort of the way that I see the cognitive behavioural model. There are certain triggers, and the triggers might be leaving the house, or it might be walking past a syringe on the beach, or it might be touching something that's a bit sticky, or being given money that looks a bit dirty. So these are triggers. And the triggers lead to certain kinds of intrusions, and it might be intrusions about contamination, it might be intrusions about an intrusive thought about the house, blowing up because you were walking out and you saw that the oven was not quite right, or didn't look quite right, or when you switched off the lights it didn't feel exactly right. Now these triggers lead to these intrusions, and these intrusions can be really bad, right? They can be just the worst possible intrusions ever. And they lead to anxiety, distress, a sense of threat and a sense of discomfort. And anyone who doesn't want to have a shower when they see Donald Trump, God bless. Now, and as we've described before, this discomfort, this sense of dread, this sense of threat is dealt with through these compulsions or the neutralisation strategies. The hand washing, the checking, the putting things in order, whatever it may be. It will differ from person to person. Now, people feel anxious or people feel the need to do something on the basis of what they make of these intrusions. Now, those of you who drove here today, I suggest to you that you probably had about 5 to 10 murderous thoughts on the way here. Now, I'm new to Adelaide, and God, your people can't drive. You are the worst drivers on the planet. Honestly. Doing, 20k under the limit in the right-hand lane is just the so I have murderous thoughts every day, right? And look, I'm Greek, maybe that's just the way of my people, right? But I suggest to you that many of you did have a murderous thought today, or you might have had a sexual thought that maybe wasn't quite right, or a blasphemous thought that wasn't quite right. But most of us ignore these things. And like bubbles in a lemonade glass, if you leave the lemonade glass on the kitchen desk, on the kitchen bench overnight, the bubbles will be there, but by the morning they're gone. Whereas if you stuck your finger in the lemonade glass and started to get rid of a specific bubble, what would happen? You create more bubbles. And that's a very nice metaphor for OCD. The difference is, though, in OCD, you can create more, you can just keep creating bubbles forever and ever and ever and ever. At least with a lemonade glass, it has a sort of finality to it. Right? But not in OCD, because we are structured, we are produced to create as many thoughts as we want or as we need. Now, these appraisals lead to this kind of feedback loop, if you like. But the appraisals are based on specific beliefs. Those of us that leave the intrusions alone, like bubbles in the lemonade glass they go, probably believe that thoughts don't define who we are. We don't need to actually control our thoughts. You can usually leave some thoughts out there and not pay much attention to them. But people with OCD have specific beliefs about these intrusions. A whole group of us got together way back in the 90s. We developed measures of these beliefs, and we found it to be true that there are 6 belief systems that actually characterise OCD. Now, there are more. We focused on the 6. We came up with 19, in fact, and we focused on the 6. Why 6? Because it wasn't 5 and it wasn't 7. No real reason. And since then, actually, we've been doing a little bit more research, and we've identified a few more that we think are particularly important. And as I say, all of this leads to feedback loops. If you respond to an intrusion, you make the intrusion more salient. If you respond to an intrusion on the basis of beliefs, you've just supported those beliefs. And so on and so forth. Now, this is important to have this kind of understanding, because it leads to certain implications for treatment. The first is that you have to modify the reactions to the triggers and the intrusions. You have to stop the compulsions. Right? You have to stop the anxiety. You have to help people manage their anxiety. You have to facilitate behavioural change by helping people to face their fears rather than avoid their fears. But you have to do it gradually. If you do it too fast, then they can't maintain the treatment. You have to change the reinforcement and the feedback loops. But you also have to change the beliefs and the appraisals. So in the good old days, we used to have exposure and response prevention therapy, which is basically facing the fears and not doing much about them at all in a gradual manner. But in the 90s, after we discovered these belief systems existed, we started coming up with cognitive therapies and the use of behavioural experiments to test unhelpful beliefs so that we can get people to hang in there, hang in the treatment, carry out the necessary exposure work, but actually to change the cognitions that maintain, that are sort of the engine of the whole thing. And so we help people develop healthier attitudes and more rational beliefs and expectations. A thought doesn't define who you are. I don't have to over-control my thoughts. In fact, the more I do, the less control I have. If I touch something that feels sticky, well, let's think this through, because it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to cause me or somebody else an infection. It doesn't mean that I'll get HIV. So to actually change the belief systems and develop more rational ones. And that's what we call cognitive behaviour therapy. So we did a review and we found that CBT is the most effective psychological treatment for OCD, bar none. It is at least 3 times more effective than most of the medications. The question is never, should somebody be on medication or not? The question should be, why isn't the person who you're seeing not getting a full dose of cognitive behaviour therapy? Some people need medication, some people don't. But the question should always be, why aren't people getting cognitive behaviour therapy? So we developed a treatment that we called the systematic treatment of obsessive compulsive phenomena, or STOP therapy. Pat McGorry has taught me one thing in my whole life: get an acronym. Right, so we're now calling it OCD STOP, and it's got all the features that I talked about before. And we did a lovely little control study, had a wait list of about 8 to 10 weeks. We started treating. We had a 12-week individual treatment program, and then we followed people up 6 to 12 months later. The particularly important element of all this is the Y-box, the Yale-Brown Obsessive Compulsive Scale. It's a clinician-rated scale. It is the gold standard that is used in medication studies and, of course, in psychological studies to evaluate efficacy. Most people start somewhere around the 25, anywhere up to 32 on average. That's what you're sort of getting in most studies. And most people end up somewhere around 15 or 16. We were very lucky. We got down to about 11 on this particular trial. Now, effect sizes, I'm sure. Now, I did this talk for I did a public talk, so I have to explain effect sizes. But effect sizes are. Whoops, this is not working now. Oh, there you go. Can range between 0 and whatever. 0 to 0.3 is considered small, 0.3 to 0.7 is considered moderate, 0.8 and above is considered a large effect, and we got an effect size of 1.7. Huge. So large effects and no major differences for medicated versus non-medicated people at any point. Depressed versus non-depressed participants, and obsessional versus mixed presentations. So the treatment is effective for all kinds of presentations of OCD. And recovery status, well, what you're finding is that about 60% of people will recover. Actually, on average, you'll find that it's between 40 to 50% of people will recover. We just happen to get a particularly good outcome because we have a particularly good treatment. But of course, there's a little bit of fall off afterwards. So our results compare very well with meta-analyses. Meta-analyses is shown to be between 1.9, 1.3, on average. We've got a 1.7, that's quite good. CBT versus medications, moderate size differences comparing CBT and medications in the direction of CBT. However, there are inconsistencies in that, and in fact the SSRIs are certainly the more effective and as good as CBT. Combination treatments usually very useful for some kinds of presentations. Depressed and obsessionals tend to do better with a combination. But we've got a long way to go until we get excellent recovery. I think, with only about half of the people recovering, these treatments are not good enough. We need to do something more. We need to get to the point where, 95% of people are recovering. So what do we do? By the way, just to give you a sense of what it's like in the hoarding area, there's a whole range of studies. Ours was the red one. It was one of the shorter treatments, but actually it was as effective as the other very effective treatments. We're getting, good, generally large effect sizes, but this is using the Savings Inventory Revised, which is currently, the gold standard. This is the mean score of the SIR in normal controls, 12. And look where even the really good studies are only getting to about 43, 42, 45. Got a long way to go in the hoarding area. So CBT is effective, but only about, for OCD, but only about half recover and only about 5% receive the CBT. So I said before that only about a third get treatment. Actually, most of that third get medication treatments. CBT is the best current treatment for hoarding disorder, but we still have a long way to go. But even with effective treatments, there are barriers to access. All right? In particular, the shame, embarrassment, the stigma, the poor help seeking. The low number of qualified therapists. Not a lot of people can do effective CBT for obsessive compulsive disorder. Even clinical psychologists don't necessarily get enough experience when they're being trained in CBT for obsessive compulsive disorder. There are costs, there's inconvenience, and of course, it's hard enough to find an expert in a big city. How the hell can you find an expert if you're in a rural or remote area? It's just so difficult. So geographic remoteness is a big issue. So clearly we need to do something about this. And of course, the digital revolution is here to help us. I was not a fan of the use of the digital revolution for OCD because I was a clinician. It's all about the relationship. And my kids who were, adolescents at the time were like, oh, Dad, you've got to do something for my generation. We're not going to go see, we're not going to lie on a couch and talk about how much we hate you. I reckon this will work, and my friends had to use, an app or use a... So I went, okay, did a bit of research. As we know, most of the world's population have access to the internet via computers and mobile phones. 88% of Australians have internet access in particular. Let's put something together. Therapy delivered digitally allows flexible delivery, integration of information, because you can put together videos and worksheets and questionnaires and you can text people. It requires less therapist time, therefore more cost effective. So that because we have very few therapists, now we can treat more people. It's convenient, it's accessible at all times. You can deliver it to remote areas. The content is controlled and therefore easily updated as more evidence comes online. And it's private and anonymous if you ignore Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. But you need regular access to computers and the internet. That can be problematic, but as we saw in Australia, we're getting better and better, and actually across the world, we're getting better and better. And the other problem is that sometimes you need assistance and support and motivation, but actually, with the new digital revolution, that's not impossible to do through the various technologies. So there's been a number of trials in this area, but the treatment it's been a little bit variable. Automated treatments, we did a study at the top in 2011, an open trial. It was self-directed, had a moderate effect size. Anderson and Wooten, Wooten, Australian, again, Anderson, Swedish, and most of the stuff in this area comes from either Sweden or Australia. Got really large effect sizes. Lovell, on the other hand, from the UK, found no significant benefit in a for a program that had previously been found to be very useful. So the other thing about the evidence base is that we're not comparing apples and apples. So you might be comparing online CBT with waitlist control, or you might be comparing it with face-to-face, or you might be comparing it with bibliotherapy, but no one's actually compared an online treatment, the apple, with another online treatment that shouldn't work, another apple. So we put together, with a fair bit of money from the Department of Health and Ageing as it was then, the Mental Health Online website through the National E-Therapy Centre that we had developed at Swinburne University. www.mentalhealthonline.org.au still exists, and anyone can have access to these treatments for free for a whole range of, mostly anxiety treatments, but there are others available as well. We just had a paper published in the Journal of Medical Internet Research on our OCD program that I'll show you soon. There's my lovely wife's hands modelling how to do that. And, we have mood monitors, we have downloadable worksheets, we have thought and behavioural experiments, we have videos of people's stories from go to woe, you have experts at the beginning and the end of every session, and we compared our treatment with internet-based progressive relaxation training. The nice thing is they were absolutely comparable, the two conditions in every way. So here are the results. So we started at somewhere around 24, 25. ICBT led to some very nice decreases. Interestingly, progressive relaxation therapy led to some decreases at post-treatment. People had access to these over 3 months, 12 weeks. The effect sizes, depending on how you analyse the data, were high for ICBT, and they were moderate for IPRT, the progressive relaxation training. At the end of the progressive relaxation training, those participants were then given the CBT treatment. By the way, that was a significant difference at that point. They were given the CBT treatment, and as you can see, they continued. Is it easy to show that? Yeah, they continued to improve. Those that got the CBT were offered no more treatment after that, and they maintained their gains. So, I won't go through this. High magnitude effects, a little less effective than face-to-face, but still good. And in particular, the fact that therapists who sent one email to each of the participants, if the participants emailed them, and each therapist took a maximum of 15 minutes to write that email. So whereas in face-to-face you'd see one person in an hour, now you could see 4 people in an hour. But actually, as it turned out, most people saw or managed 6 people in an hour. A lot of people didn't write an email. A lot of people wrote multiple emails. In our previous research, we'd found that whether a therapist sent somebody an email once or an email 10 times a week, it made no difference to the outcomes. So we stayed with the one, and we stayed with the 15 minutes. What was interesting is progressive relaxation showed some moderate effectiveness. This was a particularly keen group because they wanted to get the CBT at the end of it. So I think that's part of it. And the other part of it was we contextualise the relaxation techniques as part of managing your OCD situations. So I think that worked as well. There was no significant advantage in having both the progressive relaxation training and the CBT. The CBT on its own was as effective as the combined treatment. Now, we had probably a less severe cohort than many face-to-face trials, and we did that on purpose. If anyone was too severe, if anyone was suicidal, if anyone had a lot of comorbidity, we actually didn't take them into the trial because of safety concerns and ethical concerns. But we did have people who were severe, but didn't have other comorbidities and weren't suicidal, and they responded as well. So severity actually was not a predictor of treatment outcome, funnily enough. When we did a meta-analysis, we were smack in the middle of effectiveness. So now I want to take this to the next step. So just a few more slides to tell you where I think this needs to go. A lot of people dropped out after session 6 to 7. Right? So, and particularly the younger they were, the more likely they were to drop out earlier. So shorter programs, I think, are required. And the literature is telling us now that you need 5 to 8 max. Anything beyond that, and people drop out. We need to individualise programs. So we need some transdiagnostic content, and then we need some very specific content for individuals. We need to improve engagement. And my personal view is smartphone apps is the way to go. And we're developing one at the moment with some money we got from a firm, another philanthropic trust in Canberra. We need to augment whatever it is we do with the new technologies, so the use of avatars, virtual and augmented reality. We need to use gamification. A lot of people now are wearing smart sensors and wearables, and we need to use these. And we need to use artificial intelligence and holograms. So anyone wants to know what the future's like, I suggest that you see Blade Runner 2049. And I quote from my children, who clearly have been quite good at predicting the future. And we need to translate this into blended and stepped care models. So we've already got transdiagnostic content on Mental Health Online. As I say, we're developing our app. And we'll be rolling this out quite soon. It needs some technical help. John, if you can get us a little bit of money, I can finish this off quite quickly. We've already started to use avatars. So this is an avatar generator that we developed, and you pick your therapist, you pick who you are, and skin tones can change, clothes can change, age can change. And as you pick your avatar, you actually then get individualised packages of videos. So the videos, if you're an older male, are of older males. If you're a younger female, they're of younger females. We also have this capability in what we developed at Swinburne to walk into the virtual clinic. You sit down, and then you can actually face-to-face each other should you choose to do so. Our early indications are that actually the clients don't like to show themselves. The therapists are happy to, but after about 2 or 3 sessions, the clients do then show themselves. And again, it's the need to normalise and to help people overcome the shame and the stigma. Virtual reality treatments are being used everywhere. They're being used in social anxiety. So look at the top and then compare that to the bottom. And this is for somebody giving a talk. So you're giving a talk and everyone's quite interested, or you're giving a talk and everyone's like, And so people, learn to deal with that. That's straight exposure work. It's being used with PTSD, in PTSD a lot. And the PTSD treatments are just fantastic. And, the bombs go off and the thing shakes, and it's very, 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 very useful. Arachnophobia, acrophobia, it's happening all over the place. No one's done it in the OCD space. They're beginning to use it now. So this is the use of virtual reality in OCD checking. So they asked people to go through a house, and then people who were healthy had lower anxiety before and after checking, but actually people who had OCD had much higher anxiety and had much bigger drops as a result of that. So again, we can see that virtual reality is going to be a useful way forward. We've already used some digital work in the hoarding area. So we had a group of people that we treated with a face-to-face hoarding program, and you can see that they all did quite well. Half of them were then randomised into no more treatment, and you can see that they relapsed, and half of them were given an online maintenance treatment, and you can see that they continued to get better. Interestingly, I don't have it on this slide, but actually when these people were then given the online treatment, they started to get better too. So I think there's a lot of potential here for using this technology, even amongst people who would not normally A, have electricity, B, have access to Wi-Fi. So we actually gave them a tablet. Now, the likely future, well, this is the thing that kills me the most is that the average person by 2020 will have more conversations with bots than with their spouse. Well, I'd like to see those marriage satisfaction ratings, but But I think that there's something to be said now about the use of technology moving forward. The problem is psychologists and psychiatrists are amongst the most resistant professions to automate or to use digital technologies. They need to be nudged, using nudge theory, funnily enough, because we have this belief that it's all about the relationship. Well, and research has looked at this, and there's a range of levels of adoption of e-mental health, and no use all the way through to innovative use. You don't need to read all of this, but basically a key driver for psychologists to adopt e-mental health is the belief and experience that it can be beneficial to them or their clients. Them financially, or them in terms of just rolling out the information that is really boring to roll out all the time. Or their clients ultimately in terms of efficacy. And they do see advantages, and there was a strong relationship between the extent to which psychologists have adopted e-mental health and the drivers and barriers that they experience. And a paper that was published just this weekend found that psychologists who believe that they could facilitate the personal relationship with their client through the use of e-mental health are much more likely to adopt e-mental health technologies. Now, it's all about the relationship, as I've mentioned a few times. And yes, it is. It's very important, but you don't need to see someone face to face. Our email therapists had high personal relationships or therapeutic alliance ratings with their clients. So now we can accommodate all this into step care models, all right? And depending on how people's presentation varies, you can vary the intensity of the intervention, and then you need to have certain moderators because it'll be different depending on language, on culture, on age, on other risk factors. If someone's suicidal, even though their OCD severity might be low or moderate, well, actually, they probably might need more high-intensity treatment. So we need to moderate these things. But we have no evidence base for this at the moment. We keep talking about it. Policies are written about it. We actually don't have step care in this country. I know we say we do, but we actually don't, unlike the NHS. But even if we did, we don't have it such that it's based on evidence. And this is a direction that I think that our Institute of Mental Health and Wellbeing needs to go. This is a direction that I think the MRFF funding model should go. And we particularly need to deal with these sorts of issues. So we are developing more sophisticated treatments that can be accessed more easily through the digital means. So hope is always the start of everything. We've got a long way to go. Professionals and health funding have to keep up with public needs and be commensurate with the burden of disease. So in mental health, 5% of funding goes towards research in mental health. Burden of disease, 12%. So we need to, be a little bit more politically clever and tell our politicians what we need to do. And research has to keep up with the public needs and the technological advances, and they be translated into policy. So thank you.